Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I am your host, Paula Shaw, and I am delighted that you are here today because this is a show that is near and dear to my heart. I will be talking on today's show with Elizabeth Allen, who I had a personal experience with when we recently lost our little animal friend Wikky, who'd been a part of our family for 16 years. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that little guy in just a moment. But please stay with us because Elizabeth will be sharing her experience, her knowledge and her wisdom about one of the toughest experiences that we go through in life. And if you're an animal lover, you know that rarely do our animals live as long as we do. And at some point, we come face to face with the decision of when to let them go, when to put them out of their pain or their suffering, which can be so hard for us when they are part of our lives. So we'll be exploring all of that with somebody who has many years of experience in helping people. Not only does she help people with grief support, she's an author and a poet, and she's written extensively about this very subject. So, all you animal lovers, stay with us because we've got a show that I think is going to be very important for you. So, as you all know, I'm Paula Shaw. I'm the host of this show. I'm also an author. I have written three books. The first one was Chakras, the Magnificent Seven, looking at those energy centers in the body that we all need to work with and balance each day. The second book was called Grief. When will this pain ever end? And any of you who have suffered loss know that feeling, I'm sure. And the third one is called Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. And it's all about what's helpful to say and what's not helpful to say when you're dealing with those difficult conversations with people who are emotional, who've suffered loss of some kind and are dealing with the feelings, grappling with the feelings. And what do we do about that? Do we just kind of ignore it? Do we wait until they feel better? What do we do? Well, saying the right thing when you don't know what to say is kind of a great little handbook to help you know not only what to say, but how to say it. And that can be equally important. I am also a life transition coach. I have a private practice and I work with people who are dealing with the ups and downs and the upheaval of change. Because change is the one constant in life. We say that all the time on this show. It's coming, whether we like it or not. And so often we don't like it, or we just don't know how to cope with it. And for years, I have been working with people who are dealing with loss and they're suffering grief. And let's remember, grief is not just about death. Anytime we suffer a loss, the normal natural response is grief. And sometimes we think because it's a normal, natural thing, we should know how to do it. We should be good at it. But that isn't necessarily the case at all. Oftentimes, we need help getting through that grief journey because remember, it's a process, not an event. And there are many twists and turns on that journey. And even if you've taken it before, each time is unique. And one of the things I can tell you after 28 years of working with grieving people is that sometimes they are shocked by how hard and how painful the loss of their animal friends is. I have literally had clients tell me, I'm grieving more over the loss of my dog than my mother, and I can't figure out why that is. We're going to talk about that a bit today because that can be true for many people. It's a tough, tough loss when we lose our animal friends. And as most of you know, I shared a show a couple of weeks ago about that very event happening in my family when we had to make the decision about whether or not to part with Wikky, my daughter's dog of 16 years, who started out when we were all living together in the same house, started his life with us. And since then, it's had many adventures that we'll talk about in just a minute. But it was a very, very tough thing that we had to look at, a tough, tough decision. And I know that many of you out there, you may even be in the throes of that decision right now. And that's why I wanted to share this show with you and share Elizabeth Allen with you, because she works with people making those decisions all the time. And she just has a great deal of wisdom and a great deal of experience to share with us to help us know better what to do. So, you know that here on Change It Up Radio, we are all about either spotlighting change makers, people like Elizabeth Allen, who are trying to make the world a better place, or we're trying to bring you information to help make change smoother and more productive in your own life. We humans have a tough time with change. We need it. Sometimes we love it. It's imperative for growth. And yet we hate the discomfort of the unfamiliar. We just hate feeling that feeling we have when something's different and we don't exactly get it. So change is tricky. Change can be really, really difficult. So please, if you aren't already following this show, follow us, subscribe to us. We're on every major podcast platform. We have a Facebook page, Change It Up Radio, and an Instagram page by the same name. We even have a Change It Up Radio community on Facebook. So please find us and join us, because we do our best to bring really good quality shows so that the information we share with you is really helpful and can really do a lot to make your life smoother or to help you through a tough time. So, our own store. Oh, and by the way, the website where you can go to hear past shows, as well as any podcast platform, is changeitupradio.com. That's changeitupradio.com. All right. Also, by the way, on that website is information on being a guest on this show or a sponsor. So, the story of our little Wikky, 16 years ago, when my daughter was a sophomore in college, she came to me with what I thought was an absolutely terrible idea. She said she wanted to get a dog, and not only a dog, but a small Pomeranian dog. And we had already a dog. We had a nice large family dog that was an Aussie Shepherd Border Collie cross. And we loved that dog, and he was the perfect dog. So you can imagine, after raising him from a puppy, now it seemed like life was just starting to get sane. And my daughter decides she wants a new dog, a puppy. And I had a feeling that it was going to end up becoming a job for me. So naturally, I was not really excited about this idea. But any of you who know my daughter, Erin Shaw, know that when she really wants to do something, it's pretty much going to happen. So one day, this little teeny fella that was about the size of a guinea pig comes home with my daughter. She'd gone to the breeder, picked him up, and brought him home. And I have to say, I think for anybody that ever met Wicket Bear Shaw, who we called Wikky, it was love at first sight. You know, he just grabbed your heart and that was it. It wasn't yours anymore. He was a little sweetheart. He could be a handful, but he exuded energy, love, and joy. And that's a combination that's pretty irresistible. Wikky ended up living in New York City with Erin. He lived in New Orleans. He lived in Los Angeles. He traveled all around the South for a whole summer. He rode the subway. I mean, this little guy ended up having a very interesting and a very full life with my daughter. And after 16 years last month, we had to make the decision as to whether or not to let him go because he'd become very ill. His sight was going. He was very anxious. A lot of these things happen as dogs get older. And yet I know when you love a little being, you don't want them out of your life. You can't even imagine your life without them. And those decisions that we end up having to make at the end of an animal's life are grueling. I mean, I have to tell you, I've used that word more than once. I may have even used it when I shared about him on the show a couple of weeks ago. It's grueling to actually have the power to decide when your animal friend's life will end. And yet, it's also the option to do something incredibly kind and incredibly loving, but it has its bizarre aspects because we don't usually as humans have that kind of power to decide whether life goes on or life ends. And one of the people that helped us on that day was Elizabeth Allen, who I am going to be bringing on right after this break. So please stay with us, especially if there's anything going on in your life that may involve this kind of a decision. You want to hear from this lovely lady who has a lot to say about what we're looking at and what we need to do and what we need to consider when it's time, it's that period of time when an animal's life maybe should come to an end as the most loving and kind thing to do. So please stay with us. We'll be right back with Elizabeth Allen. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio here with Paula Shaw. We're talking about what we do when we have to say goodbye to unconditional love, the unconditional love of an animal. And here in this segment, I'm going to be discussing that very thing with Elizabeth Allen, who is an author, a poet, an animal lover, an educator. She does grief support for people who have lost their animals, people who are looking at end of life issues. She is just a lovely human being. And I think without any further ado, I'm going to bring her on. So, Elizabeth, would you please join us?
Hi, Paula. Hello.
Hello. So good to see you, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us today. I know you've been listening, and as I shared with everybody, you were part of our own personal journey when we had to go through this very issue ourselves. And I have so many things I want to ask you. I hardly know where to begin. But first, how about sharing with our listeners what brought you to this kind of work? I know for years, I've been counseling grieving people, and many times people say to me, "Why would you want to do that?" And I share with them that really it's so gratifying. It's work that just gives me such joy because when people are hurting so much, it's so wonderful to be able to help that. But what's your journey? What brought you to this kind of work?
Thank you, Paula. That's a great question, and I think it always goes back to the first animal, and for me, that was my first cat,
Mm,
and her name was Fiona. She was a beautiful white cat, and when her end of life came, um, I had no idea that it would be so painful.
mm,
Um, I don't think anyone really prepared me. Actually, I know I was not prepared at all. And and when I made that decision, because her quality of life was just, it was gone. She had cancer.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the day after that, I just went into deep grief. And I'd never lost a human being before. So I had really had no contrast. And Fiona being my first loss, I just went into deep grief for a couple of days. And I said to myself, if I get through this, I'm going to help other people,
Oh.
because yeah, it just felt like the right thing to do. And so I went that journey with my grief with Fiona.
Mhm.
And when I was good and ready, I started researching how I could support other people. Yeah.
Did you, what came first? Did you write your books first? Were you working, supporting people first? Were you in your practice? What did you do next?
I started supporting people first. I reached out to a holistic veterinarian in San Diego that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically said, I'm going to come and help you with your clients that are going through pet loss. And so I got some great experience there, and it just kind of blossomed from there. It's been like over 15 years now, and I've been in this industry for a long time. And then I had so many stories of my experience with clients and their pets. I thought, well, I'm already a writer. Let's start
Mhm.
writing books about this.
Good for you. And I think it's so important too, because as I shared in the beginning of our show, so often people are a little bit incredulous that they're in as much pain as they're in. I've had many a person sit across the room from me counseling them, and they're like, I can't believe this. I can't get over it. And when I first started 28 years ago, I don't know exactly how to put this. It's not that people weren't humane then, but I can't tell you how many times, Elizabeth, people would say to me, I I was crying and a friend said, "Well, what happened?" And I said, "I lost my dog." And they're like, "Oh, we'll just get another one." And almost as though that wasn't a being that they loved, that just replacing the body of the animal would somehow make them better. Have you noticed any kind of a shift in people's attitudes? And it almost feels like they're a little bit more tolerant now and understanding.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think times have changed, and people have. We're all evolving, including the animals, and with that evolution comes a more heart-centered consciousness. And in heart-centered consciousness, we recognize these sentient beings as being a huge part of our lives. You know, so
Mm.
many people are choosing not to have children, but yet have four-legged children.
Yes.
And so, love is love. Gone is gone, grief is grief, and pain is pain. And whether it's a human or an animal, there's a process.
Yes.
And but we are coming to recognize pet loss as a real loss.
Hmm.
At least in my world, we do. And
Hmm.
hopefully that radiates out to everyone we come in contact with. You
Yes.
know.
Our first family animal that we had to part with was back in 2008. And I don't remember that there was any kind of a service like the one you work with. Back then, I just happened to get the name of a vet who would come to you. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this whole concept of in home euthanasia, because I'll tell you, for my family, especially this go round, having the support that we had from beginning to end with this service and with you was such an important part of our healing. So, how do you feel about in home euthanasia? What advantages do you feel it offers, and disadvantages, if any?
Well, that's a wonderful question too. In my experience with my first animal loss, I didn't know about in-home euthanasia. So I
Hmm.
took her to the vet, and that was what it was.
Hmm.
But now, if I had known about in-home euthanasia, I would have chosen that. And I think it's two very different experiences. Choosing to do it at home in familiar surroundings with people they know, you can create an exit that is not necessarily, you know, terribly sad. Yes, there's tears, but you can create an ambiance. You can have friends over. You can play music.
Hmm.
You can read. You can talk about them, and you can just create an experience that you can look back on and say, well, that was as good as it gets for a
Yes.
departure. Yeah,
Yes. In fact, that was almost word for word what I said. I said that was as beautiful as a painful experience could be. And, we were allowed our tears. My daughter did play the music that she'd chosen that he loved. And, we had the perfect setting for him. It was familiar people, familiar smells. I mean, to the very end, he was happy and comfortable to be there with us, the beings that he loved. And I felt so good about that. I thought that it really did a lot, like you say, to help us all heal. And then just to be right there at home after it was over, where my daughter, my son, and I could cry together, just process together. We lit a fire in my fire pit and we sat around that and just talked and cried and shared stories about Wikky. It was truly such a spiritual experience on so many levels. I would imagine
that's so
you have a
wonderful.
lot of people who feel that same way, that have experienced this.
They do indeed, yeah. And it also helps with the grieving process down the road,
Mm.
because you can look back on it, as you will do, and you'll
Hmm.
think to yourself, that was as good as it gets, just like you said. And
Yes.
you can feel like you did that well. It was a good death.
Absolutely. Well put. Well put. Now, sometimes I was mentioning earlier, sometimes we feel like just because loss and grief are normal, natural parts of life, that we should be able to handle it perfectly. But we don't always. And that's another place where you come in. You help people with various therapies and grief support. Can you talk a little bit about that, Elizabeth?
Sure, absolutely. People tend to reach out, and it's interesting, either in the first 3 days after they've lost a pet, or a month later when they feel
Mm.
like they're not where they thought they'd be,
Yeah.
and they're just needing that little bit of extra support. And I always say that I don't like give any advice. I think what I try to do, or what I aim to do, is just to create a sacred space so people can really, talk about, the hurt and the pain that they're going through.
Mhm.
And somebody can actually just be there and witness that for them. And
Yes.
then by lightening their load, they literally feel lighter, and that somebody heard them and somebody understands. You
Yes.
know, yeah,
I think that's such a huge word right there. Somebody understands. Because I remember we used to feel like if you're not an animal lover, you don't get it. You don't understand how I feel at the loss of this animal. And I think the understanding piece is so huge, Elizabeth, so huge. And you do other things to help people when they're dealing with loss as well. We're going to have to take a little break here, but when we come back, I'd love you to talk a little bit about vibrational therapy and maybe share something about these books you've written. And let's be sure to tell everybody if you need to leave the show and you're interested in getting in touch with Elizabeth, you can find her at her through her website, Elizabeth M.J. Allen, ALLEN.com. We will be right back with more of Elizabeth Allen. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw. We are talking today about how do I say goodbye to unconditional love, which of course comes when we lose our animal friends. And my guest, Elizabeth Allen, has many years of experience in helping people deal with the end of life for their animal friend. She is an author. She does vibrational therapy, which we're about to ask her about. She does grief support, and she is just a lovely human being who understands animals and understands how difficult it can be when you lose that animal that you love. So Elizabeth, we were talking a bit in the last segment about ways that you work with people, and you were saying how helpful it is sometimes just for them to be able to talk a bit, to feel understood, and to get a chance to express what they're feeling to someone who gets it, who isn't saying, oh, buck up, why don't you just get another one, that kind of thing. So tell me, what other ways do you work with people that are dealing with the pain, the true pain and sadness of having lost their animal friends?
Well, you definitely said the word there, pain. It can be, grief in and of itself is an energy, and it can really press down on the heart center, the heart chakra. And
Yes.
so that pain can become quite physical, you know? And when people come to me, they'll say sometimes, I feel like there's just a heaviness in my chest, and I can't get a full breath, or I'm not my usual self, or I'm just not feeling motivated. And so I work with sound a little bit with tuning forks,
Hmm.
and tuning forks actually help clear the vibrational energetic field around the body. So we work on all the chakras to kind of move old energy that could be stuck, and it can be just not necessarily from this loss or this grief, but it can be accumulated grief for over a lifetime that really is just kind of sandwiched in there. And then it's taken the loss of a pet, which is the catalyst for this healing to occur. So with tuning forks, we move that energy right out of there, and we recalibrate, and people mostly say they feel lighter. They
Mm,
feel like they've dumped some emotional baggage, is what they say. And
yes. And
yeah,
I have been working in the field of energy psychology for like 28 years, so I totally get what you're talking about. People don't realize that everything is energy, everything in the whole universe, and grief and emotion, that's energy. And sometimes that energy is very dense and heavy. And you actually do, as you so well pointed out, you feel it on a physical level. But when you can lighten that vibration to a higher place, and it can move and not be that dense, heavy thing that almost feels like just a giant rock in your heart, it can make a huge difference. A huge difference.
yes, absolutely. I think most people, like, I love to hear back from people afterwards. In a couple of days, I'll check in with them and see how they are. And I think it makes my heart so happy when I had one client once and she said, oh my goodness, I'm at the shelter, I'm getting another dog.
Ah,
So it really moved her energy to the point where she felt like she was now ready to move forward with another pet. And of course, that made me uber happy.
there's an interesting question right there. People always say, how long should I wait before I get another dog or a cat or whatever? What do you feel about that?
Well, that's a question that a lot of people ask because they want to know if they're honoring their deceased pets, life, and is it going to be too soon? And I just say it's so appropriate to do it when you feel it's right for you. I'm the type of person, if I had four animals one day and then three the next, I'll be a week later adopting another one. That's me, but that's right for me. And somebody else might really need a longer period of time to heal and
Mhm.
to feel like they're ready. And maybe they won't be ready for a long time, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and I'm so with you on that because I have known people who got a replacement too soon, and their heart just wasn't open to the next animal. And then they thought there was something wrong with that animal, when the truth was it truly wasn't the right time for them. And that's a big thing. That's a really important thing, the timing. And kind of like so many things in life, there's no one size fits all answer, right? It's individual for each person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's just tuning into what your heart is telling you, and you'll generally always make the right decision if you listen to your heart.
Yes, I so agree. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about the books and the poetry that you've created. Are they all on animal themes?
Actually, yeah, four of my books have been about, my life with animals and all the stories along the way.
Mhm.
I haven't had children, but I have the animals. And so we've gotten up to great stories, a good life together, and lots of frolics and lots of fun. And then, a lot of the stories about the clients and their losses kind of woven into the books too. So they're happy sad. That's what I call them. And they can help someone who's going through a pet loss. You can give them words to their grief and
Yes.
make them feel not alone.
And where can our listeners find your books?
On my website at elizabethmjallen.com and also on amazon.com.
Very good. And what are some of the titles of your books so they'll know what to look for?
Okay, the first book I wrote was Love Crosses Over.
Oh,
And I think that's the most popular one because it's short stories. And when
mhm,
you're going through grief, you kind of you want something short that can help you. And
mhm.
it's got poems attached to each one too. So it's stories about signs from animals and people who have died to let me know that they're okay and life goes on.
Oh,
And
that's
I think that's hopeful for people because we don't know what happens, but we want to remain hopeful that someday we'll get to see those who have crossed over again.
mhm. And
Yeah.
what I love about a book is I think some people feel like the loss happens, you feel badly for a few days, like really badly, and then life goes on and you just keep doing fine. But grief comes in waves. And I know for myself, I had one the other day, and I thought I was kind of pretty well on the other side of feeling the pain and the tears with Wikky. But you don't know when it's coming up. And so what's kind of wonderful is to have a book or a poem, something you can turn to in that moment and find some comfort.
Absolutely. They say there's 5 stages of grief. I
Mhm.
sometimes think there's 500 shades of
Yes,
grief
I'm with you
because
on.
right?
Totally.
Because yeah, and so because of that kind of awareness, you don't know when it's going to hit, you don't know how you're going to feel,
Mhm.
but when it does, you welcome it as the medicine that you need for that moment.
Yes. And I so love that you said that, because so often people feel like, oh no, I failed, or I'm not getting over it. I can't move on. I haven't gone forward. The truth is, you're having a moment. And in that moment, go ahead and cry. Go ahead and pound on pillows if you're hurting and you're angry, because it's all part of this journey. And another thing you mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, that I think is so right on, and people often don't realize, sometimes when we lose a human that we love, perhaps to death, or they move away, or they break up with us, we do what we do to get through it. Then we think we're okay. Then the animal loss comes, and we're sobbing and sobbing and inconsolable about the animal loss. But I think there's a big part of the unreconciled loss from that human loss as well that is now being grieved. Would you concur with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think pet loss can be a catalyst for deep healing because we really we relax into it because we had a great life with them. And
Yes.
so our grief is going to match the great life. And so it's going to be a great grief. And in that grieving, we might find that there are other unreconciled grieving or losses that we had along the way that are now coming up for our attention.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I think too, at different points in our life, we're more open or not to exploring the feelings, feeling the feelings, that kind of thing. And so, for example, if when you lost your mother, you had a really high pressure job and you had to get it together and keep going, and you weren't able to really allow yourself to explore the grief completely, now, several years down the road, when you lose your animal friend, maybe all of that which needed to happen all along comes up as well.
absolutely. Grief has no expiration date.
Oh, I love that. That's well put. That, and I love the line that grief is a process, not an event. You know, the old thing of getting 3 days off work when you had a serious loss is so inappropriate, because 3 days may not be enough time. It may be enough time. You know, it's every person is unique and every situation is unique. And I'm sure every animal loss is unique. And so, Elizabeth, I am just so delighted that you came and shared your beautiful self with us today and the work that you do. And again, I want to tell our listeners, if you would like to explore Elizabeth's books or learn more about her work, you can find her at elizabethmjallen.com, or go on Amazon and just plug her name into the search and her books will come up. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us today. It was delightful. I'm so happy that you have been in my life on every level. Please
Thank
take
you,
good.
Paula. Thank you so much. It's delightful. Thank you so much. Take
Thank
care,
you.
sweetheart.
All right.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye. And stay with us here on Change It Up Radio, because we've got a new segment coming up that's going to be part of our show every week. And bringing you that segment is going to be my daughter, Erin Shaw. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw. And we are having a launch of something new today. And that is a new segment that we are calling Bust a Rut. Many of you have seen on the text, where on the website and where we talk about Change It Up Radio, one of the things that you often see is stuck in a rut, change it up. Well, we decided to do something about that. So here to help me with this segment, I'm so delighted to say, is my beautiful daughter, Erin Shaw, who is a writer and a musician and a darn right great daughter. So, honey, let's tell them, what are we going to do from now on?
Well, first of all, not to correct you right off the bat, but we're calling this segment Rut Busters.
Oh, well, that's why I have her here. She's a lot younger than I, and her memory works much better.
Yeah, well, that's okay. You know, we could call it Bust a Rut, but we've been promoting Rut Busters. So I think we should probably stick with that.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you explain what we're up to here.
Sure. Well, you know, we've all kind of been in a rut the last year-ish, just
Yeah.
shy of a year now. And now we're sort of in this like COVID/winter kind of rut, you know, where it's like there was a bit of a reprieve last summer when cases were low and it was warm and we could all sort of like return to a feeling of normalcy in some ways.
Yes.
And then the winter comes, and if you're anywhere like Texas or Louisiana or the Northeast that have just been slammed with crazy
Terrible.
weather, particularly in Texas, as we well know,
Right.
you know, you could be in a very chilly rut. And
Amen. And that's even worse.
yeah. And I think my thinking was like, you know, we're all sort of in a wintry COVID rut. We're all looking forward to kind of coming back out into the world and like getting a sense of normalcy again. So let's start now. Let's start kind of preparing ourselves and getting our creativity flowing again and getting our energy flowing again and sort of getting excited rather than impatient
Mhm.
about this sort of pending post-COVID roaring 20s renaissance that I believe is coming when we're on the other side of all of this. So what we wanted to do is bring me in to give you challenges each week that your listeners can also participate in, and I can participate in them as well. And then we meet back up next week and kind of chat and talk about how it went. I remember in high school, I had a drama teacher who gave us all a copy of The Artist's Way. And that was sort of our foray into the artistic community as teenagers. And one of the things that I really liked about The Artist's Way is that it encourages you to do different things to kind of pull you out of your comfort zone, which enhances your creativity as it's like the byproduct of it. So that's kind of the inspiration for Rut Busters, is to pull ourselves out of our comfort zones and give ourselves achievable weekly challenges that kind of then can add up to an increase in energy and creativity. So that's what we're doing today.
I'm so excited to share this with you and to share it with everybody. I just this morning heard this expert saying that the brain has like these three sort of compartments, and they're not literal, obviously. But so the first one is basically survival, right? So that's where fight, flight, freeze, all that stuff happens to keep us alive.
Yeah.
Then, if we figure out things that seem to be working, like if you find a great fishing hole and it's safe to fish there and you get fish every time, then you're automatically going to go back there again. We do the same thing with behaviors. We automatically go back to things that worked the last time, but
Right.
it's sort of an automatic pilot hypnotic state. But the
Yes.
third area of the brain is visionary. And that can only be stimulated when we get out of the other two. So I love that. I thought, oh my God, that's so perfect, because that's what we're doing
Right.
with Busters.
You got it. You did it. Great job.
We're going to get out of automatic pilot response,
Right.
which is basically just relying on old neural nets that are already there. And the other thing is, it really improves your brain when you create new neural nets. And for any of you who aren't familiar with that term, that's what happens when it's like whenever you do certain activities over and over again, like brushing your teeth, the neurons wire together. The neurons, the axons, those cells in your brain, they wire together. And then you can just roll it without really thinking about it. Many of you don't think much about the path you drive on the way to the office.
Right.
Yeah. A little bit, right?
Well, and we stop seeing things when we do that. How many times have we all had those moments in our neighborhoods where you're like, I didn't know there was a CVS there. Or, you're like, oh my God, that house is bright pink. How have I never noticed that? Right. Like we've all been there, you discover things that you should have seen a million times. Right. And that's exactly what you're talking about. We just get on autopilot and then we just miss out on so much. So for today, this week's challenge, are you ready for it?
I am ready.
All right. Are you raring to go?
Be gentle.
This week's challenge is you and your listeners are going to either walk a different route on your daily walks, or if you're not doing walks right now, if you're going for drives, or if you do have to drive to your work for whatever reason, your assignment is to drive a different route than you normally go. Or, if you're running just out to the grocery or to the drugstore or whatever, same idea. So the idea is to shift yourself into a habit of going different ways and see, just see how it feels. I don't want to give too much away about what I'm expecting is going to happen. So I won't really say much until we come back next week to sort of, rehash and discuss. But I want you and your listeners to just walk different routes, drive different routes than you ordinarily would, and just kind of notice how that feels for you as you're doing it. And then we will, next week we'll discuss and kind of chat about how that felt, and if it impacted you in any way. For some people, it might not, but yeah, that's this week's challenge. So going forward, every week, we will kind of be regrouping on the challenge from the week before, and then we will discuss a new challenge. And we're just going to kind of play and experiment and see how this feels. The other thing I'd love to encourage you and your, I almost said readers, that's for me because I'm a writer, your listeners, is to start doing morning pages. And this is like a little bonus, a little lanyap. Morning pages are 3 pages in your journal, handwritten, stream of consciousness, can be complete gobbledygook, doesn't have to be Pulitzer Prize winning writing, but the idea is just to kind of download each morning before you do anything. If you're a meditator, you can meditate first, but you wake up, before you get out of bed, go to the bathroom if you need to, but like before you start your day, grab your notebook or your journal or whatever, keep it by your bedside, on your bedside table, and you just write 3 pages stream of consciousness. And then when you're done with your 3 pages, you start your day. So that's if you're looking for a little extra challenge, that's my just overall, it's a great practice to begin.
It's so funny because just this morning on my walk, I was thinking, because I have lots of different routes that I often try to explore, but I realized this morning, wow, I'm in a rut of this same path. Because I so love it and I love the views there, that I've been just taking it over and over again. And it's funny, perfect timing. Now you say this. So, okay, so now I'm going to have to be making a conscious decision each day,
right,
to change that route.
And you can return to your favorite route, of course, but the idea is when something isn't every day, I think we enjoy it more, but there's other stuff that I think is going to happen. So we'll kind of check back on that next week. But yes, you do have to sort of consciously, and also maybe you're not the type of not you, but maybe one of your listeners isn't the type of person who's been making daily walks a practice right now. And in winter, it can be tough because it's cold. We're lucky in Southern California that the weather's really beautiful right now, but for, 6/8 of the rest of the country, it's not. So,
right.
Yeah. So even if it's a short walk, I think it's really good to get into a habit. I like to take 2 a day sometimes if I can, or go for a long hike. But yeah, if you're not in the practice of doing a walk, start now. Some people, I don't know about you, I get very motivated by like new purchases. So if I buy myself a new pair of running shoes, I'm more likely to go running. So maybe one of your listeners is like, I'm not really a walker, I'm not really a runner, but maybe like a new pair of tennies would motivate you.
Oh yeah, when I got those tennies, I don't even know what they're called. The ones I got in Carmel that have a very broad bottom. Walking was like being on springs. It was so much fun that, yeah, I'm out there a little more.
Yeah.
There's another thought I was just having about this. What if also, if anybody has something kind of remarkable happen to them, what if they post on our Change It Up Facebook page?
I would say if anybody has like an incredible rut buster experience, please send us a message or leave a comment on our socials. Instagram is at Change It Up Radio, and I believe it's facebook.com/Change It Up Radio. Is that right?
Yeah.
You can search for it. And but definitely, because we're going to be posting on our socials about our experiences as well. So if anybody has a great experience, tag us in your story or your post, and we'll try to throw it up and kind of share. Because I think one of the fun things about doing this segment is we can build a little bit of a community, and just kind of all share how it's going. It's been an isolating year. So any way we can come together, I'm all for it.
And I am too. I'm excited about it, and we're out of time. So I want to thank you, darling Erin Shaw, for the great idea. So participate with us on Rut Busters, Rut Busters. And you can hear us, of course, every Sunday night at 9 o'clock on AM 1170 and 96.1 FM. We're on every major podcast platform, iHeartRadio, Blog Talk Radio. It's very easy to find us. Just ask Alexa, ask Siri. There we are. All right. See you next week for Rut Busters, darling, and see all of you again next week, too. Take care.